The stars looked different from the bridge of the USS Horizon. Captain Jake Morrison had seen many star systems in his 20 years of space travel, but this one made him nervous. 3 alien ships waited for them near the massive space station, called Nexus Prime. Each ship was bigger than anything humans had ever built. Jake stood straight in his blue uniform as his ship moved closer to the station. His crew worked quietly at their stations. They all knew this day would change everything. For humanity, first contact with alien species, the moment they had dreamed about and feared for generations. Commander Lisa Bennett walked up to Jake. She carried a thick folder of papers and looked worried. Lisa had studied alien cultures for years, but today she would meet them face to face. Her brown hair was pulled back tight, and her green eyes showed the stress she felt. "Captain, we are getting signals from the station. They want us to dock at Base 7, she said. Jake nodded. "How are you feeling, Lisa?" "Scared," she said honestly. "We know so little about them. The Zephyrians have controlled this part of space for thousands of years. The Corvan Empire fights wars across 10 star systems. The Helian Federation trades with hundreds of worlds, and us? We barely left our own solar system 50 years ago." The USS Horizon shook gently as it connected to the space station. Jake looked at his crew one more time. "Remember, everyone, we represent all of humanity today. Let's make Earth proud." The airlock opened with a soft hiss. Jake and Lisa walked through long metal hallways that felt cold and empty. The station was huge. Their footsteps echoed as they moved toward the meeting room. The human guards followed them, but Jake knew their small weapons would be useless if things went wrong. The meeting room doors opened and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The room was enormous, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. 3 groups of aliens sat at a curved table that could have held 100 humans. The Zephyrians sat perfectly still like statues. Their skin was gray and smooth, and their large black eyes never blinked. They wore simple white robes and seemed to study the humans like scientists looking at insects. High Coordinator Vexel sat in the center. He was taller than the others and had silver markings on his forehead. The Corvan warriors looked like they were made for fighting. Their red skin was covered in scars and their hands ended in sharp claws. They wore black armor that had seen many battles. General Krekstar kept touching the weapon at his side and seemed angry that he had to sit and talk instead of fight. The Helian Federation members looked the most like humans, but their blue skin glowed softly in the dim light. They wore expensive clothes covered in jewels and precious metals. Trade Master Yilvin smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who saw profit in everything. Jake and Lisa took their seats at the small section of the table marked for humans. Jake felt very small in the huge room surrounded by beings who had traveled the stars. When humans still lived in caves. "Welcome, humans," High Coordinator Vexel said. His voice was flat and showed no emotion. "We have heard much about your species. You have spread quickly through your local systems. Very quick for such a young race. Thank you for meeting with us," Jake replied. "Humanity is honored to join the galactic community. We hope to learn from your wisdom and share what little we have discovered." General Krekstar laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "What could you possibly teach us? Your ships are slow, your weapons are weak, and your people live such short lives." Trade Master Yilvin leaned forward. "Still, they might be useful. Humans work hard and don't ask for much pay. They could handle basic labor on our trade routes." Lisa felt her face grow hot with anger, but she kept her voice calm. "We may be new to space travel, but humans have qualities that might surprise you. We are creative, determined, and we care deeply about others." "Care deeply?" High Coordinator Vexel tilted his head. "Explain this concept." Lisa looked at Jake, who nodded for her to continue. "Well, for example, last month we lost contact with our colony ships in the Kepler system. When we sent rescue ships, we found that a solar flare had destroyed their power systems. 50,000 people died before help could arrive." As Lisa spoke about the lost colonists, her voice began to shake. She remembered the messages they had received. Families saying goodbye to each other. Parents holding their children as the life support systems failed. People using their last power to send messages of love to Earth. Tears started to form in Lisa's eyes. She tried to stop them, but thinking about all those people made her heart hurt. One tear rolled down her cheek, then another. The alien stared at her in shock. High Coordinator Vexel leaned closer to examine her face. "What is happening to the human? Is she malfunctioning?" General Krekstar made a disgusted sound. Water is leaking from her eyes. How revolting. Trade Master Yilvan whispered to his assistants, who started typing notes quickly. Fascinating. The human appears to be damaged by merely discussing past events. Lisa wiped her eyes and tried to explain. I'm not broken. These are tears. Humans cry when we feel sad or when we think about people who have suffered. You leak bodily fluids because of thoughts. High Coordinator Vextel's voice showed. The closest thing to emotion the Zephyrians ever displayed, confusion mixed with disgust. This is the most primitive behavior we have observed in any spacefaring species. The other aliens began to whisper among themselves. Jake could hear words like unstable, defective, and dangerous. He wanted to defend Lisa, but he knew that getting angry would only make things worse. Dr. Amy Carter, who had been quiet until now, stood up. She was the team's expert on alien biology and had studied every species they might meet today. If I may explain, tears are a normal human response to strong emotions. They help us process difficult experiences and bond with others who share our pain. Bond through the sharing of pain. High Coordinator Vextel exchanged glances with the other Zephyrians. This explains much about human inefficiency. You allow past events to affect your current decision-making. You waste energy on beings who are already dead. General Krekstar slammed his fist on the table. Any species that becomes weak at the mention of loss has no place in galactic affairs. Wars are coming, human. When they arrive, will your people leak water and become useless? Our emotions make us stronger, not weaker, Lisa said, but her voice was quiet now. Trade Master Yilvan smiled his cold smile. Perhaps there is a use for humans after all. Your emotional responses might be entertaining to other species. We could set up shows where humans react to various stimuli. Watch. The leaking humans could be quite profitable. The room filled with what passed for laughter among the aliens. High Coordinator Vextel raised his hand for silence. We have made our decision regarding humanity's place in the Galactic Council. You will be granted probationary observer status. You may watch our proceedings, but you may not vote or participate in decisions. Perhaps in a few hundred years, when your species learns to control these emotional leakages, you might be reconsidered for membership. Jake felt his heart sink. Observer status meant humanity would have no voice in galactic affairs. They would be treated like children, watching while adults made decisions that affected their future. The meeting ended quickly after that. As Jake and Lisa walked back to their ship, neither spoke. The hallway seemed even colder now, and their footsteps sounded lonely in the empty corridors. Back on the USS Horizon, Lisa sat in her quarters and allowed herself to cry properly, not just for the lost colonists, but for humanity's future. They had traveled so far and worked so hard to reach the stars, only to be dismissed as emotionally defective by species they had forgotten what it meant to care about others. Jake stood on his bridge looking out at the alien ships. Tomorrow they would return to Earth with news that would disappoint billions of people. Humanity had finally met their neighbors in the galaxy, and those neighbors thought humans were too weak to matter. But as Jake watched the stars, he wondered if the aliens were wrong. Maybe caring about others wasn't a weakness. Maybe the tears Lisa shed for strangers she had never met showed a strength the aliens couldn't understand. He just hoped they would never have to find out which of them was right. 6 months had passed since the humiliating first contact meeting. Earth had received the news badly. Protests filled the streets of major cities. People demanded their government do something about humanity's treatment by the alien species. But there was nothing to do except accept their role as galactic observers. Admiral Pete Cullen stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, humanity's largest warship. Even calling it a warship felt like a joke now. Compared to alien vessels, human ships looked like toys made by children. Pete was a career military man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had fought in 3 human wars, but those conflicts seemed small now that he knew what existed beyond Earth's solar system. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority message from Galactic Command," said Colonel Nancy Wright, his second in command. Nancy was tough and smart, the kind of officer who never backed down from a fight. But even she looked worried as she handed him the message pad. Pete read the message twice before he believed it. "They want us to do what?" "Evacuation duty, sir," Nancy said with disgust in her voice. "The Void Swarm has appeared on the Outer Rim. The alien powers are assembling a fleet to destroy them. We get to rescue civilians while the real military handles the fighting." Major Tim Foster, the ship's tactical officer, looked up from his station. Tim was young, but brilliant, and Pete could see anger in his eyes. "Sir, our weapons might not be as advanced as theirs, but our crews are just as brave. Why won't they let us fight?" Pete sighed. "Because they think we're too emotional to be trusted in real combat. Remember what happened at the first contact meeting? They saw Commander Bennett cry and decided we're all unstable." The truth hurt more than Pete wanted to admit. 6 months ago, the galaxy had seemed full of possibilities. Now humanity was treated like the galactic cleanup crew. Their job was to comfort refugees and transport supplies while others made the important decisions. Captain Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication system. He was commanding a group of smaller ships nearby. "Admiral Collins, are you seeing the tactical reports from the Outer Rim? These void swarm creatures aren't like anything in our databases." Pete pulled up the reports on his main screen. The images made his stomach turn. The void swarm looked like living shadows that moved through space without ships. They consumed everything in their path: planets, stars, even space stations. Entire solar systems had gone dark in just days. "Jake, what do you think we're dealing with?" Pete asked. "I don't know, sir, but Dr. Rick Hayes on my science team has been studying their attack patterns. He thinks there's more to this than simple consumption. Rick believes they're learning from each encounter." Dr. Rick Hayes was a behavioral scientist who studied how different species thought and acted. He was quiet and thoughtful, the kind of person who noticed things others missed. Pete respected his opinions, even if the alien commanders ignored human insights. "Put Dr. Hayes on the channel," Pete ordered. Rick's voice came through clearly, though he sounded tired. "Admiral, I've been tracking the void swarm's movements for weeks. They're not random. Each attack is more sophisticated than the last. They study their targets first, learn their defenses, then strike in ways that cause maximum damage with minimum resistance." Colonel Nancy Wright frowned. "Are you saying they're intelligent?" "More than intelligent," Rick replied. "I think they're collective consciousness. They share information instantly across vast distances. Every victory teaches the entire swarm new tactics." Pete felt a chill run down his spine. "Have you shared this with Galactic Command?" "I tried, sir." High Coordinator Vextel said my conclusions were contaminated by human emotional attachment to the data. General Krekstar laughed and said I was seeing patterns that didn't exist because humans fear the unknown. Major Tim Foster slammed his fist on his control panel. "They won't listen to anything we say, even when we might have information that could save lives." The communication channel crackled with another incoming message. This time it was from Zephyrin Grand Admiral Kexamore, the military leader of their fleet. His cold voice filled the bridge of the USS Liberty. "Human vessels, you will proceed to evacuation zones 7 through 12. Civilian transports require protection during their retreat from the combat area. This assignment matches your species' natural inclination toward emotional caretaking." Pete gritted his teeth, but kept his voice professional. "Understood, Grand Admiral. The human fleet will protect the civilian evacuation." "Excellent. Try not to let your emotional responses interfere with basic navigation. We cannot afford to rescue human ships that become lost because their crews were distracted by the suffering of others." The channel closed before Pete could respond. Around the bridge, his officers looked like they wanted to start a fight with the nearest alien ship. Pete understood the feeling. Nancy Wright spoke first. "Sir, did he just suggest we might crash our ships because we care too much about saving people?" "That's exactly what he suggested," Pete replied, "and apparently he thinks that makes us a fit for real military duty." Over the next few weeks, the human fleet carried out their evacuation missions while the alien powers prepared for war. Pete watched thousands of refugee ships from dozens of different species, families fleeing their homes with nothing but the clothes they wore, children crying for pets left behind, elderly beings who had lived on the same worlds for centuries, now homeless and spaced out. The human crews worked day and night to help these refugees. They shared their food, gave up their sleeping quarters, and provided medical care to anyone who needed it. Pete was proud of his people, but he also noticed something troubling. The alien military commanders were not just ignoring human tactical suggestions, they were actively mocking them. Grand Admiral Kexamore had started a practice of broadcasting human communications during planning sessions, then laughing at what he called emotional contamination of logical analysis. During one particularly painful incident, Captain Morrison had suggested that the void swarm might be targeting systems with high emotional resonance, places where beings felt strong attachments to their homes, The suggestion was broadcast to the entire alien fleet, followed by comments about human tears clouding human judgment. The mockery went viral across alien communication networks. Soon, beings throughout the galaxy were sharing jokes about crying humans and their inability to think clearly. Comedians on alien worlds started routines about humans who leaked water from their eyes whenever they encountered problems. Pete received reports that human civilians on mixed species stations were being harassed. Alien children would pretend to cry when they saw humans, mimicking the behavior they had seen in broadcasts. Adult aliens would ask humans if they needed tissues when discussing any serious topic. The worst part was that some humans were starting to believe the criticism. Pete received requests from several officers asking for emotional suppression training. They wanted to learn how to stop feeling so much, to become more like the logical alien species. "Admiral," Dr. Hayes called over the communication system one evening. "I need to show you something important." Pete made his way to the USS Horizon, where Dr. Hayes had set up his research laboratory. The room was filled with charts, graphs, and video displays showing void swarm attack patterns. "Rick, what have you found?" Dr. Hayes pointed to a series of images. "The void swarm isn't just learning tactical information, Admiral. They're learning emotional patterns. Look at these attack sequences." Pete studied the images. "I don't understand what I'm seeing. They hit the Zephyrian colonies first with standard consumption patterns. But watch what happens when they encounter species that show strong emotional responses." Rick changed the display. "Here, they attack a Corvan military base. The Corvan warriors fight with typical aggressive patterns. The swarm adapts to their aggression and overwhelms them." The next image showed a different kind of attack, but here, they encounter a mixed civilian population that includes families and children. The swarm's behavior changes completely. They seem to feed off the fear and despair of the victims. Pete felt his blood run cold. "Are you saying they eat emotions?" "I think they consume negative emotions as much as they consume matter and energy. Fear, despair, hopelessness. These feelings seem to make them stronger and more coordinated." Double quotes. Dr. Hayes pulled up another display. "Admiral, I've been tracking their movement patterns, and I think I know where they're heading next." Pete looked at the star chart and saw a line pointing directly toward the Zephyrian home system. "They're going after the heart of the Zephyrian Empire." "Yes, sir, and based on my calculations, they'll arrive in 3 days. The alien fleet won't be ready in time." Pete stared at the chart for a long moment. The same aliens who had mocked human tears and called them emotionally defective were about to face an enemy that fed on the very emotions they claimed to have evolved beyond. The irony was bitter, but Pete took no satisfaction in it. If the Zephyrian homeworld fell, billions of innocent beings would die, and humanity, despite being treated as inferior, would still do everything in their power to help. "Rick, prepare a full report on your findings. I'm going to try one more time to make the alien commanders listen." Dr. Hayes nodded, but his expression was doubtful. "Admiral, what if they won't listen? What if they dismiss this as more human emotional thinking?" Pete looked out the window at the massive alien fleet preparing for battle. Ships that dwarfed anything humans had ever built, crewed by beings who considered themselves superior to humanity in every way. "Then we'll have to find another way to help them," Pete said quietly, "because that's what humans do. We help, even when others don't want our help, even when they mock us for caring." As Pete returned to his ship, he thought about the refugees his fleet had rescued, families who had lost everything but still thanked the human crews with tears in their eyes, children who had hugged human officers and called them heroes in languages the humans couldn't understand. Maybe the aliens were right that human emotions were a weakness. Maybe caring about others did make tactical decisions harder. But as Pete looked at the reports of the approaching void swarm, he wondered if the aliens' lack of emotion might be an even greater weakness. In 3 days, they would all find out which approach to life and war would prove stronger. The alien fleet was the most powerful force ever assembled in galactic history. 2,000 ships from 3 different species hung in space like a wall of metal and energy weapons. Admiral Pete Collins watched from the USS Liberty as the massive vessels prepared for battle. Grand Admiral Kexamor's flagship was 3 miles long and carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The Corvan battlecruisers looked like floating fortresses covered in weapon ports. The Helian Federation had brought their newest shield technology that could protect entire planets. Pete felt very small commanding his 40 human ships at the edge of the formation. The aliens had made it clear that humans should stay back and watch how real warriors fought. High Coordinator Vexel had said the battle would be a good learning experience. For the emotionally immature species, Admiral, the Void Swarm has entered the system, reported Colonel Nancy Wright from her sensor station. They're coming in fast. Pete looked at the main display and felt his heart stop. The swarm was huge. Thousands of dark shapes moved through space like living shadows. They had no ships, no visible technology. They were the technology. Each creature was the size of a building, and they moved together like a school of fish in a black ocean. My God, whispered Major Tim Foster. There are so many of them. Captain Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication channel from the USS Horizon. Admiral, Dr. Hayes is tracking their formation. He says they're moving in patterns that suggest collective intelligence. Every creature knows what every other creature is thinking. Grand Admiral Kexamore's voice boomed across all channels. All ships, prepare for engagement. We will destroy these simple creatures with superior firepower and tactical planning. Victory is logical and certain. The alien fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Pete had to admit it was beautiful to watch. Every ship knew exactly where to go and what to do. The Zephyrians had calculated the optimal attack pattern using computers that could think faster than biological brains. The Corvid warriors had planned aggressive strikes that had won 100 wars. The Helian Federation had positioned their defensive ships to create overlapping shield barriers. It should have worked perfectly. The first wave of alien weapons lit up space with energy beams and missile explosions. Pete watched the tactical display as thousands of rounds hit the approaching swarm. Many of the dark creatures were destroyed, their bodies dissolving into space dust. Direct hits confirmed, reported Major Foster. The aliens are causing significant damage, but then something terrible happened. The remaining swarm creatures began to change. They moved differently, avoided the areas where their companions had been destroyed. Within minutes, they were dodging weapons that had been hitting them easily just moments before. They're learning, Dr. Hayes said over the communication channel. Every death teaches the survivors how to avoid the type of attack. Grand Admiral Kexamore seemed unconcerned. Adaptation is expected. Activate Phase 2 of the battle plan. The alien fleet shifted into a new formation and began using different weapons. Plasma cannons, gravity bombs, and energy nets filled the space between the two forces again. Many swarm creatures died. Again, the survivors adapted even faster than before. By the third phase of the battle plan, the Void Swarm was anticipating every move the aliens made. Weapons that should have surprised them were avoided before they were even fired. Tactical formations that had never been used in battle were countered perfectly. How is this possible? General Krekstar roared over the communication channel. Our battle plans are flawless. Our calculations are perfect. Pete realized what was happening and felt sick to his stomach. They're not just learning from what we do. They're learning from how we think. Dr. Hayes confirmed Pete's fear. Admiral, the swarm is studying the logical patterns in the alien battle plans. Every decision the alien commanders make follows mathematical principles. The swarm's collective intelligence can calculate those principles and predict what comes next. The fourth and fifth phases of the battle went even worse. The Void Swarm began attacking before the alien commanders gave their orders. They moved to counter formations that hadn't been implemented yet. They were winning the battle by thinking faster than their enemies. Then the swarm did something that changed everything. They stopped just attacking and started feeding. Pete watched in horror as dark tendrils reached out from the swarm creatures toward the alien ships. The tendrils didn't try to damage the ships physically. Instead, they seemed to connect with the crews inside. Admiral, Captain Morrison's voice was tied with fear. We're getting reports from the alien ships. Their crews are experiencing massive psychological distress. Fear, hopelessness, despair, emotions they haven't felt in thousands of years. High Coordinator Vexel's usually calm voice cracked as he spoke over the general channel. All ships, we are experiencing system malfunctions. Crew efficiency is dropping rapidly, requesting immediate tactical analysis. But there was no time for analysis. The Void Swarm pressed their advantage. As they fed on the negative emotions of the alien crews, they grew stronger and more coordinated. Their attacks became more precise and devastating. The great alien fleet began to fall apart. Zephyrian ships, their crews paralyzed by unfamiliar feelings of terror, drifted helplessly in space. Corvid warriors, overwhelmed by despair for the first time in their species. History could not function. Helian Federation vessels, their crews consumed by hopelessness about profit and loss, stopped maintaining their defensive positions. Admiral Collins, Grand Admiral Kexamore's voice was barely recognizable. "We require immediate assistance. Our casualties are approaching 60%. Pete looked at his small human fleet. 40 ships against thousands of swarm creatures that had just defeated the most powerful force. In galactic history, it should have been hopeless. But Pete felt something the alien commanders couldn't understand. He felt angry, not the cold, calculating anger of a tactical decision. This was hot, protective fury at seeing innocent beings suffer. It was the anger that came from watching bullies hurt people who couldn't defend themselves. It was human anger, messy and emotional and completely illogical. All human ships, prepare for combat, Pete ordered. Colonel Nancy Wright looked at him with surprise. "Sir, our orders were to stay back and observe. Our orders were written by people who don't understand what we're fighting," Pete replied. "Tim, give me a channel to all human vessels." Major Foster nodded. "Channel open, Admiral." Pete took a deep breath. "This is Admiral Collins to all human ships. I know we were told to stay back and let others do the fighting. I know they think we're too emotional to be trusted in real combat, but look at what's happening out there." Pete gestured toward the battle. "Those creatures are feeding on fear and despair. They're using negative emotions as weapons against species that claim they don't have emotions. But they do have emotions. They've just forgotten how to handle them." Captain Morrison's voice came through clearly. "What are your orders, Admiral?" "We're going to show them how emotions really work, not just the negative ones that make us weak, but all of them, the ones that make us strong." Pete opened a channel to the alien fleet. "Grand Admiral Kexamore, this is Admiral Collins. We're coming to help." There was a pause before the Zephyrian commander replied. "Admiral Collins, your ships cannot succeed where our superior vessels have failed. The logical conclusion is that you will only add to our casualties." "Maybe," Pete said. "But we have something your ships don't have. We have crews who aren't afraid to feel." Captain Jake Morrison moved his ship forward first. The USS Horizon was small compared to the alien vessels, but it moved with purpose and determination. Behind him, the rest of the human fleet followed. Dr. Hayes came on the communication channel. "Admiral, I'm reading the emotional resonance from our ships compared to the alien vessels. The difference is remarkable." "What do you mean?" Pete asked. "The alien crews are broadcasting pure fear and despair. That's exactly what the swarm feeds on. But our crews are different. Yes, they're afraid, but they're also determined. They're angry about what's happening to innocent people. They're sad for the losses we've already suffered. They're hopeful that we can make a difference." Pete began to understand. "The swarm can't feed on mixed emotions. More than that, sir, I think positive emotions might actually be toxic to them. They've evolved to consume simple negative feelings, complex human emotions that combine fear with love, sadness with hope, anger with compassion. Their systems can't process that." The human fleet engaged the swarm, and immediately Pete could see the difference. The swarm creatures that had been anticipating every alien move seemed confused by human unpredictability. Human pilots didn't follow perfect mathematical patterns. They made decisions based on intuition, emotion, and the desire to protect others. "Commander, Lisa Bennett led a rescue mission into the heart of the swarm formation. Her ship, the USS Hope, darted between massive swarm creatures to reach a damaged Zephyrian vessel. The swarm tried to feed on her crew's emotions, but found something they couldn't digest. Lisa's crew wasn't just afraid. They were afraid for the Zephyrian crew they were trying to save. They were sad about the destruction they had witnessed, but also determined to prevent more loss. They were angry at the swarm for hurting innocent people, but also compassionate toward the enemy they didn't fully understand. "This is impossible," Dr. Hayes said with wonder in his voice. "The swarm creatures around Commander Bennett's ship are actually retreating. They can't process the emotional complexity of her crew." Major Susan Clark, commanding a squadron of fighter ships, demonstrated something even more remarkable when faced with impossible odds. Her pilots didn't retreat according to logical assessment. They advanced, driven by love for the people they were protecting and grief for the worlds already lost. The Void Swarm had never encountered anything like human emotional responses. They tried to feed on human fear, but choked on human determination. They attempted to consume human sadness, but were poisoned by human hope. For the first time since the battle began, the swarm faltered. Their perfect coordination broke down as they encountered emotions they couldn't understand or digest. Some creatures began to move away from the human ships, confused and weakened. High Coordinator Vextel watched from his flagship as human vessels saved alien crews throughout the battle zone. "This is not logical," he said, and for the first time in his life, his voice carried something that might have been wonder. "The humans are succeeding where we failed. Their emotional responses are providing tactical advantages we did not anticipate." Grand Admiral Kexamore's voice came over the general channel, and it sounded different than before. "Less cold, more alive. All alien vessels observe human tactical patterns. Their crews are making decisions we cannot predict, and apparently neither can the enemy." Pete smiled grimly as he watched his fleet fight. The aliens had mocked human tears and called emotions a weakness, but emotions weren't just about crying. They were about caring enough to risk everything for others. They were about finding strength in the connections between people. They were about refusing to give up when logic said there was no hope. The battle was far from over. But for the first time, Pete believed they might actually win, and if they did, it would be because humans had learned to cry for others, and that made them willing to fight for others too. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and everything had changed. Admiral Pete Collins stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching human ships lead the fight against an enemy that had seemed impossible to defeat just hours earlier. The alien commanders who had once mocked human emotions were now begging for human assistance. Grand Admiral Kexamore's proud voice had been replaced by desperate requests for tactical advice. High Coordinator Vextel, who had called human tears primitive, was now asking human captains to take command of mixed-species formations. "Admiral," Colonel Nancy Wright reported, "Captain Rodriguez is requesting permission to implement his new fighter strategy." Pete nodded. Captain Danny Rodriguez had an idea that would have seemed insane to any logical military mind. Instead of using calculated attack patterns, he wanted his pilots to fly based purely on instinct and emotion. No battle plans, no coordinated formations, just human pilots following their hearts into combat. "Danny, you have permission to proceed," Pete said over the communication channel. Captain Rodriguez's voice came back full of determination. "Thank you, Admiral, all fighter pilots. This is going to sound crazy, but I want you to forget everything they taught us about space combat. Don't think about tactics or formations. Think about the people we're protecting. Think about the homes these creatures have already destroyed. Feel your anger, feel your sadness, and then fly like your life depends on it." 20 small fighter ships launched from the human carriers. They moved through space like angry hornets, darting and weaving in patterns that made no sense to military computers. The void swarm tried to predict their movements and failed completely. Dr. Amy Carter's voice came over the communication system from her laboratory on the USS Horizon. "Admiral, I'm seeing remarkable results from Captain Rodriguez's fires. The swarm creatures are actually avoiding them. It's like the emotional chaos of the pilots is creating a field that the swarm can't penetrate." The breakthrough that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rick Hayes had been studying the swarm's behavior for hours when he made a discovery that sent chills down his spine. "Admiral Collins," Dr. Hayes called urgently, "I need you to see this immediately." Pete made his way to the research station where Dr. Hayes had been working. The room was filled with displays showing brainwave patterns, emotional resonance readings, and behavioral analysis charts. "Rick, what have you found?" Dr. Hayes pointed to a complex diagram. "Admiral, the void swarm isn't just feeding on negative emotions. They're feeding on simple emotions: fear, anger, hate, despair. These are all basic feelings that the swarm can understand and consume, but human emotions are different." "Exactly. Human emotions are complex. We don't just feel one thing at a time. A human fighter pilot can be scared and brave at the same moment. A rescue captain can feel sad about losses while also feeling hope for the future. The swarm's collective intelligence can't process these contradictory feelings." Dr. Hayes changed the display to show emotional readings from both alien and human crews. "Look at this. Zephyrian crews broadcast pure fear when they're in danger. Corvin warriors feel simple rage when they fight. Helian Federation members experience basic greed or loss. These are the emotions the swarm evolved to consume." The human readings were completely different. Charts showed waves of mixed feelings that changed from moment to moment. Fear mixed with love, anger combined with compassion, sadness balanced by determination. The swarm creatures are like computers trying to run software they don't understand. Dr. Hayes explained, "Human emotions are too complex for their system to handle. Pete stared at the data and felt a new understanding of what they were fighting. Rick, what would happen if we could amplify these emotional differences? I think we could do more than just confuse them, Admiral. I think we could actually hurt them. Dr. Carter's voice interrupted their conversation. Admiral, we have an emergency situation developing. The swarm is regrouping for a massive assault on the Zephyrian homeworld. They're forming up in a way we haven't seen before. Pete rushed back to the main bridge where the tactical display showed thousands of swarm creatures moving into a perfect sphere formation around the Zephyrian home system. Inside that sphere were billions of innocent beings who had never experienced the terror that was about to consume their world. High Coordinator Vexful's voice came over the emergency channel, and for the first time, Pete could hear real emotion. In it, fear, yes, but also something else, regret. Admiral Collins, our homeworld's defenses cannot withstand what is coming. Our people have never experienced emotions like this. They don't know how to process fear or despair. The swarm is feeding on them faster than we can evacuate. Pete closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about the billions of Zephyrians who were about to die. These were the same beings who had mocked human tears and called emotions a weakness. But they were also innocent people who didn't deserve to suffer. High Coordinator, we're coming to help your people, Admiral Collins. This is not logical. Your small fleet cannot succeed where our larger forces have failed. You will only be adding human casualties to an already hopeless situation. Maybe, Pete replied, but hope isn't always about logic. Sometimes it's about doing what's right even when the odds are impossible. Pete opened a channel to the entire human fleet, all ships. This is Admiral Collins. We're about to attempt something that every computer in the galaxy would say is suicide. We're going to take our 40 ships and fight thousands of swarm creatures to protect a world full of people who think we're inferior. Captain Morrison's voice came back immediately. Admiral, what are your orders? We're going to show the galaxy what human emotions really mean. Not just the tears they mocked, but the love that makes us willing to die for strangers. Not just the fear they laughed at, but the courage that comes from caring more about others than ourselves. The human fleet moved toward the Zephyrian homeworld. With a determination that amazed the alien observers, Commander Lisa Bennett led the first wave, her ship diving straight into the swarm formation. Her crew's emotions were a mixture of terror and resolve that the swarm couldn't understand. Major Susan Clark commanded the ground forces that landed on the planet's surface. Her soldiers faced impossible odds as swarm creatures descended from orbit. Any logical assessment would have ordered immediate retreat. Instead, her troops advanced, driven by love for the civilians they were protecting and grief for the worlds already lost. The turning point came when Dr. Hayes made his most important discovery. He had been monitoring the emotional resonance of human crews when he noticed something incredible. Admiral, Dr. Hayes called excitedly, the humans aren't just confusing the swarm. They're actually making the creatures sick. Complex emotions are like poison to their system. What do you mean? When Commander Bennett's crew rescues Zephyrian civilians, they feel a combination of fear for their own lives, love for the people they're saving, anger at the creatures hurting, innocence, and hope that they can make a difference. The swarm tries to feed on these emotions and can't digest them. Dr. Carter added her observations. It's more than that. The swarm creatures that encounter human emotions are beginning to change. Some of them are breaking away from the collective consciousness. It's like human feelings are too chaotic for their high mind to process. Pete realized they had found the key to victory. All human ships, this is Admiral Collins. I want you to do something that's going to sound strange. I want you to feel everything. Feel your fear, but also feel your love for the people you're protecting. Feel your anger at this enemy, but also feel your compassion for all the innocent beings who have suffered. Admiral, Major Foster asked, are you asking us to become more emotional in combat? I'm asking you to become more human. The aliens have spent thousands of years trying to eliminate emotions from their thinking. They thought feelings made them weak, but our emotions don't make us weak. They make us who we are. The results were immediate and dramatic. Human ships that embraced their full emotional range became almost impossible for the swarm to attack. The creatures would approach a human vessel and then flee, unable to process the complex feelings radiating from the crew. Captain Rodriguez led his fighters in a charge that defied every principle of military science. His pilots flew with tears streaming down their faces, tears of fear, tears of joy, tears of anger, tears of love. The swarm creatures that tried to feed on these emotions became confused and disoriented. On the planet's surface, Major Clark's soldiers fought with a ferocity that came not from hate, but from love. They wept for their fallen comrades while charging forward to save Zephyrian children. They felt terror at the monsters they faced while feeling hope that their sacrifice would matter. High Coordinator Vextel watched from his command ship as humans did the impossible. They were winning a battle against overwhelming odds, not despite their emotions, but because of them. This cannot be happening, he said to his staff. Everything we know about efficient combat operations says emotional responses create tactical disadvantage. His science officer, a younger Zephyrian who had been studying human behavior, spoke carefully. High Coordinator, perhaps our understanding of emotions was incomplete. The humans do not experience single emotions. They experience all emotions simultaneously. This creates unpredictability that even a collective intelligence cannot anticipate. Vextel was quiet for a long moment. Then, he said something no Zephyrian had said in over 1,000 years. I think I am feeling something new. Is this what humans call gratitude? The battle for the Zephyrian homeworld was far from over, but for the first time since the Void Swarm had appeared, the defenders were winning. And they were winning because 40 human ships had done something the most logical species in the galaxy thought was impossible. They had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. They had weaponized their humanity. The final battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Above the Zephyrian homeworld, 40 human ships faced the largest concentration of Void Swarm creatures ever assembled. Admiral Pete Collins stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, knowing that the next few hours would determine the fate of billions of innocent beings. The swarm had learned to avoid direct contact with human ships, but they had also adapted. Now they were trying a new strategy. Instead of feeding on individual crews, they were attempting to drain the emotional energy from entire planets at once. Admiral Dr. Rick Hayes called from his research station. The swarm is doing something we haven't seen before. They're connecting with each other to form a massive emotional vacuum. They're trying to suck all the feelings out of the Zephyrian population. Pete could see the effects on his tactical display. Cities across the planet were going dark as their inhabitants fell into an emotionless sleep. The Zephyrians, who had spent thousands of years suppressing their feelings, had no defense against creatures that could steal the emotions they barely understood. How long do we have? Pete asked. Dr. Amy Carter answered from her laboratory. At this rate, the entire planet will be emotionally drained within hours. Without emotions, even basic ones like the will to live, the population will simply stop. High Coordinator Vextel's voice came over the communication channel, and it sounded different than Pete had ever heard it. There was something new in the Zephyrian's tone, something that might have been desperation mixed with wonder. Admiral Collins, I must tell you something that is difficult for my people to admit. We have observed your crews during this battle, and we believe we were wrong about the nature of emotions. How so? Pete asked. Your tears that we mocked. We understand now that they were not a sign of weakness. They were a sign of connection. You cry for others. You feel pain when strangers suffer. We had eliminated this capacity from our species because we thought it made us inefficient. Vextel paused, and when he continued, his voice carried something that no Zephyrian had expressed in centuries. Admiral, I believe I am experiencing what humans call regret, and also what you might call hope. Is it possible that you could teach my people to feel again? Pete felt a deep sadness for the Zephyrians and all the alien species who had traded their hearts for efficiency. High Coordinator, emotions can't be taught like mathematics. They have to be experienced. They have to be felt. Then help us feel. Admiral, help us remember what we gave up. Dr. Hayes had been listening to the conversation while monitoring the swarm's behavior. Admiral, I have an idea. It's completely insane, but it might be our only chance. What are you thinking? Rick, the swarm feeds on emotions by draining them from their victims. But what if we could reverse that process? What if instead of having our emotions taken away, we could project them outward? Dr. Carter immediately understood what Dr. Hayes was suggesting. You want to broadcast human emotions across the entire planet. Use our emotional capacity to reawaken feelings in species that have suppressed them. Exactly. The swarm can handle simple emotions from individual beings. But if we could flood the entire system with complex human feelings, we might be able to overload their collective consciousness. Pete thought about what they were asking. It would mean exposing every human in the fleet to the most intense emotional experience possible. They would have to open their hearts completely. making themselves vulnerable to an enemy that fed on feelings. What would this do to our crews? Pete asked. Dr. Hayes was honest. I don't know, Admiral. We would be asking every human to experience every emotion they've ever felt, all at the same time. It could be overwhelming. Some people might not recover. Pete looked around his bridge at the men and women who had followed him into an impossible battle. Colonel Nancy Wright, who had lost her brother in the first swarm attacks, but still fought with determination. Major Tim Foster, who was terrified of the creatures, but loved his crew too much to retreat. Captain Jake Morrison, whose ship had become a beacon of hope for alien refugees throughout the war. I need to ask something of all of you that might be the hardest thing any human has ever been asked to do. Pete said over the fleet-wide communication channel. What do you need, Admiral? Captain Morrison replied. I need you to feel everything. Every emotion you've ever experienced, every feeling you've ever had. Fear, love, anger, joy, sadness, hope, everything at once. And then I need you to share those feelings with an entire planet of beings who have forgotten how to feel. Commander Lisa Bennett was the first to respond. Admiral, are you asking us to cry for an entire world? Pete smiled despite the desperate situation. Lisa, 6 months ago they mocked you for crying over 50,000 strangers. Today I'm asking you to cry for 50 billion strangers. I'm asking all of you to care so much that your feelings reach across space itself. The response from the human fleet was immediate and unanimous. Every captain, every crew member, every soldier agreed to the plan. They would risk their sanity and their emotional well-being to save people who had once called them inferior. Dr. Hayes began coordinating the emotional broadcast from his research station. All ships, I need you to think about everything that makes you human. Think about the people you love, the losses you've suffered, the hopes you carry for the future. Captain Danny Rodriguez spoke for many when he said, Doc, we've been doing that all along. Being human means feeling everything all the time. The broadcast began slowly. At first, it was just the normal emotional resonance of human crews going about their duties. But then something remarkable happened. As the humans focused on their feelings, those emotions began to amplify and spread. On the USS Horizon, Commander Bennett thought about the colonists who had died in the Kepler system. Her tears for those lost souls reached out across space to touch Zephyrian civilians who had never cried for anyone. Major Susan Clark, fighting on the planet's surface, felt love for her soldiers and anger at the creatures that threatened innocent beings. Those powerful emotions flowed into Zephyrian warriors, who rediscovered what it meant to fight for others, rather than just following orders. Throughout the human fleet, crews opened their hearts completely. They shared their fears and their hopes, their grief and their joy, their anger and their compassion. The emotional broadcast grew stronger and more complex with each passing moment. The effect on the Void Swarm was immediate and catastrophic. Creatures that had been draining emotions from the planet suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by feelings they could not process. The collective consciousness that had made them so dangerous began to fragment as individual creatures experienced human emotions for the first time. Some swarm creatures, exposed to the concept of love for others, broke away from the collective entirely. Others, feeling the pain of grief for the first time, simply stopped moving. The few that tried to feed on the human emotional broadcast became sick and disoriented, but the most remarkable effect was on the planet itself. Zephyrians, who had been falling into emotionless sleep, suddenly woke up feeling things they had not experienced in generations. Children began to laugh. Adults started to cry. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Zephyrian people felt alive. High Coordinator Vextel stood in his command center as tears, actual tears, rolled down his face. This feeling, he said to his staff, this is what the humans experience when they see others suffer. This pain in my chest when I think about my people in danger, this is what they call love. His science officer, a female Zephyrian named Silara, was also crying. High Coordinator, I believe I understand now why the humans were willing to risk everything to save us. It is because they can feel our pain as if it were their own. The emotional broadcast continued for hours. Human crews pushed themselves beyond their limits, sharing every feeling they had ever experienced. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Others laughed and cried at the same time as they felt the connection between their hearts and the hearts of strangers. Across the galaxy, when the battle finally ended, the Void Swarm was completely broken. The creatures that had once moved with perfect coordination now drifted through space as individuals. No longer able to function as a collective, many simply dissolved, unable to process the complex emotions they had absorbed. In the aftermath, representatives from every species in the galaxy gathered at Nexus Prime once again, but this time, the meeting was very different. The Zephyrians, Corvins, and Helians no longer looked at humans with contempt. Instead, they looked at them with something that might have been awe. High Coordinator Vextal approached Admiral Collins and Commander Bennett. His face showed emotions that his people had not expressed in millennia. Admiral Collins, Commander Bennett, we owe you an apology that encompasses our entire civilization. We mocked your tears because we did not understand what they represented. Vextal looked directly at Bennett, the woman whose tears had started everything. You cried for people you had never met. You felt pain for strangers who lived light years away. We thought this made you weak, but we understand now that this is what made you strong. Bennett smiled through her own tears. High Coordinator, emotions aren't something to be ashamed of. They're something to be shared. We mocked your tears, Vextal continued, but we did not understand what you cry for. You cry for the fallen, so you fight for the living. You grieve for what was lost, so you hope for what can be saved. Your tears are not your weakness. They are your promise that no one suffers alone. Admiral Collins was invited to address the Galactic Council, not as an observer, but as the representative of a species that had proven itself to be the emotional guardians of the galaxy. 6 months ago, you dismissed us as too emotional to participate in galactic affairs, Pete said to the assembled delegates. Today, those same emotions saved your worlds and your people. We don't cry because we're weak. We cry because we care, and caring for others, even strangers, even enemies, is the strongest thing any being can do. The Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership and to establish Earth as the center for galactic emotional education. Species that had suppressed their feelings for thousands of years would come to learn from humans how to feel again. Dr. Hayes was appointed as the first director of galactic emotional research. Dr. Carter became the head of the new Department of Interspecies Empathy. Captain Morrison was promoted to admiral and put in charge of training mixed species crews. In emotional cooperation, the final scene took place on New Terra, the first integrated colony world where humans and aliens worked together as equals. Human children and young aliens played together in parks, while their parents watched with tears of joy in their eyes. Commander Bennett, now promoted to captain, stood with High Coordinator Vextal watching the children play. Both of them had tears on their faces, but these were tears of happiness. Captain Bennett, Vextal said, my people have a saying now. Tears shared are strength doubled. I believe we learned this from you. Bennett smiled. High Coordinator, the best part about emotions is that they grow when you share them. The more we care about each other, the stronger we all become. Above them, human and alien ships patrolled the system together. The crews of these vessels had learned to fight not with cold logic, but with warm hearts. They protected not just their own people, but all people, because they had learned the most important lesson in the galaxy. Some things are worth crying for, and everything worth crying for is worth fighting for. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest weakness was actually their greatest strength, and in learning to feel again, every species discovered what it truly meant to be alive.